The millionaire's son choked and no one knew what to do until the maid acted in 5 seconds. The words seemed to echo through the Whitmore estate like an alarm bell that won't stop ringing. In the vaulted kitchen of the Cedar and Glass mansion overlooking Lake Mercer in upstate New York, crystal pitchers, porcelain plates, and stunned adults freeze in place. Caleb Whitmore, 7 years old, freckles dusted across his nose, clutches his throat. His eyes go wide, a terrified ocean blue, as the cube of caramelized apple lodged in his windpipe steals the sound from his cry. For a heartbeat, the room is a gallery of statues, chefs stranded mid-motion, a private tutor clutching worksheets, a security guard reaching instinctively for a radio he'll never use. Then panic breaks loose. Too much shouting, too many hands fluttering, no help, until a single figure moves cleanly through the chaos. Elena Marlowe doesn't shout. She doesn't ask permission. She's the maid, the one who refills the water glasses and folds the napkins into neat swans, the one guests seldom notice unless something goes wrong. And something is going terribly wrong now. She slides behind, the child with a precision that looks like memory, not luck, and her arms lock beneath his ribs. One measured thrust. A second. The world funnels to the sound of air and the desperate hope of a breath. On the third thrust, the apple cube rockets, free, clattering across the oak floor and spinning under the farmhouse table. Caleb wheezes, coughs, and finally sobs as oxygen rushes back into a body that had been bargaining with silence. Only then does sound return to the adults, the gasp, the prayer, the stunned applause that doesn't belong in a kitchen, the thunder of footsteps as Grant Whitmore arrives too late to stop what nearly happened and just in time to see who saved his child. Hi, I'm John Parker, and today's story will touch your heart. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give your like, it means so much to me, and leave in the comments which city or country you are listening from. Grant stands in the doorway, his tie loosened from a morning call with investors in Chicago, his watch still counting down to a noon board session in Manhattan. He is the kind of millionaire who doesn't have to act wealthy. Wealth lives in his posture, but even wealth looks mortal when it stares at its child, nearly stolen by a slice of fruit. For a moment, Grant is just a father. He crosses the room, scoops Caleb up, and rests his chin on the boy's hair, his voice breaking in a register he didn't know he had. It's okay, buddy." Then he lifts his eyes to the maid, to Elena, who stands quietly, the tremor in her hands the only proof that adrenaline has its cost. Their gaze meets. He searches for words, a thank you, an apology, the beginning of a debt, but finds only the awkwardness of a man who gives orders for a living and has just watched someone else command destiny. She nods once, like it was nothing, like 5 seconds can be ordinary. Around them, life tries to snap back to normal. The tutor collects scattered papers. The chef wipes a spotless counter. People like the world better when crises are brief and heroes go back to uniforms. But the air has changed in the Whitmore mansion. The panoramic windows still look out on water that glitters like poured silver, yet reflection can't erase the shape of fear. A child almost died. A maid was the only one who knew what to do. And there is a question, quiet, unsettling, that begins breathing inside Grant's chest. Why did Elena move like that? Who taught her to save a child with such certainty? Caleb doesn't want to leave Elena's orbit. He is small enough to feel the difference between hands that pat and hands that protect. "Can she sit with me?" he whispers, shyer now that everyone is watching. Grant hesitates. Boundaries are what hold wealthy houses together, staff on one side, family on the other. But boundaries blur when gratitude walks in. "Please," Grant says, more to himself than anyone else. "Yes, sit. Thank you." Elena pulls out a chair. She tucks a coaster under Caleb's glass, as if ritual can restore order. Her eyes skirt the edges of the room, landing briefly on the framed photograph over the breakfast nook. Grant, his late wife Lila, and an infant Caleb under a 4th of July sky in Madison, Connecticut. Lila's absence hangs in this house the way a chandelier hangs, too beautiful to ignore, too heavy to forget. Guests talk around it, since Lila passed, after the accident, as if grief were a pothole you could step over if you watched your feet. Elena never steps over it. She cleans around it, dusting the places where memories set like powder. Sometimes, when no one is home, she pauses before that photo and tells the woman in it softly, "He's growing, he's brave." The first time she did that, she startled herself. The second time she didn't. Grant notices the glance, and something tender collides with something suspicious. He has hired and fired more people than he can count. He can spot ambition masquerading as humility, but Elena's humility doesn't look like a mask. It looks like armor that's been worn long enough to shine at the edges. "Where did you learn that?" he asks, gentler than he expected. "The Heimlich." Elena's gaze remains steady. "I used to help at a church daycare in Tulsa," she says. "We were required to certify. A little girl choked on a grape once. She stops there, the sentence thinning into a place she doesn't want to revisit. "It's just good to know," she finishes, "especially around a child." There it is again, that crisp word, child, in her mouth, not as a category but as a calling. Caleb hears it too. He leans toward her the way children lean toward. A warmth. Grant watches the tilt of his son's body and remembers too many mornings where Caleb tilted toward screens or tutors or no one at all. Guilt chews at the edges of his relief. He is a provider, yes, but provisioning isn't the same. As presence, the thought curdles quickly into defensiveness. "This is why I pay for the best staff," he tells himself. "This is why the nanny agency sends resumes that read like diplomas." Still, none of those resumes mean anything now. Only Elena's certainty does. Outside, a boat hums across the lake, cutting V-shaped ripples that widen long after the motor passes. That is how moments work in families too. One crisis, and the water keeps moving. In the pantry, the head housekeeper, Victoria Hale, whispers to the chef that she's not surprised. "That Marlowe girl notices everything," she says. "I've seen the way the child looks for her. Rumor is the currency of large houses. It buys closeness where money can't. But rumor underestimates Eleanor. It paints her as an exception when in truth she is a story that begins long before this kitchen and this lake." Grant returns Caleb to his chair and sits across from them, elbows on the table like a man at confession. "Thank you," he says finally, and the words sound smaller than he wants them to be. He is used to gratitude being a transaction. Bonuses, stock options, donations with plaques on the wall. This gratitude has no ledger. It feels like a door, and doors imply rooms he hasn't explored. "You're welcome," Elena answers, voice low. She's aware of her uniform, of the invisible lines on the floor, of the way some eyes in the room are already rewriting what happened to make it easier to file away. She doesn't need applause. She needs quiet. But quiet rarely lasts in a home, built on schedules and deals. A phone buzzes on the counter, Grant's assistant reminding him of the Manhattan meeting, and the mansion exhales its usual rhythm, plans resumed, image restored. Only one pair of eyes refuses to move on, Caleb's. He stares at Elena like people stare at lighthouses after living too long in storms. Later that afternoon, while landscapers trim the hedges and a courier drops off a garment bag from a Fifth Avenue boutique, Grant finds himself in his study, staring at the framed degrees on the wood-paneled wall. Dartmouth, Wharton, the certificate from a leadership seminar in Palo Alto. He has spent a lifetime mastering everything except the one thing that was in this morning's kitchen: helplessness. He replays Elena's motion, decisive, trained, and the question that wouldn't let him breathe becomes a decision that insists on air. He needs to know who she really is, not because he doubts her, because something about her steadiness rings familiar in a house full of strangers. He calls downstairs. "Victoria, send Elena to the study when she has a minute." In the hallway outside, Eleanor smooths her apron with the kind of composure that fools inexperienced men into thinking, "She can't be shaken." But her hands remember Tulsa. They remember a small church with folding chairs and a pastor's wife who taught CPR after Bible study. They remember another child, another grape, another 5 seconds that shifted a life. And they remember a promise Elena made to a woman whose photograph still hangs in the Whitmore kitchen, a promise spoken softly on a winter afternoon when grief braided 2 strangers into something like family. Elena steps toward the study door, unaware that inside those paneled walls waits a conversation that will crack open family secrets, test loyalties, and force a choice between gratitude and pride, between betrayal and redemption, between what a millionaire thinks he knows and what a maid has never said out loud. And as her knuckles lift to knock, a faint voice from the corridor interrupts, Caleb's. And what he asks in that small, breath-steadying whisper will change the way Grant hears every word that follows. Caleb's voice, thin but insistent, carried down the corridor like a secret too fragile to shout. "Dad, don't be mad at her." His small hands clutched the banister as if afraid the words might slip and fall. Grant Whitmore paused, startled, not by the plea itself, but by the raw instinct in it. Anger? He hadn't felt anger toward Elena, not exactly. Suspicion, perhaps, curiosity that tasted too close to doubt. But his son had sensed the tension like children always do, even when adults think they're hiding it. Grant turned, his expression softer than his voice. "I'm not mad, Caleb. I just need to talk to her." Caleb nodded, though the lines of worry on his young face didn't fade. He lingered for another moment before retreating, leaving his father with a question heavier than any business deal. Why did his child trust the maid more than him? Inside the study, Elena Marlowe stepped carefully across the Persian rug, her shoes silent against patterns woven in Istanbul centuries ago. She clasped her hands before her, standing as though the polished oak desk between them were a courtroom. "Your bench." Grant gestured toward the leather chair opposite him. "Sit, please." His voice was polite, but it carried the weight of a man who owned the chair, the rug, the house, the land around it, and perhaps even the silence between words. She obeyed, posture straight, eyes fixed on the edge of the desk rather than his gaze. Grant folded his hands together and leaned forward. "You saved my son's life today. That's not something I can repay with a bonus or a letter of recommendation. But I need to understand." He hesitated, a man unaccustomed to confessing ignorance. "Where did you learn to react like that? And why do I feel as though this isn't the first time you've pulled a child back from the edge?" Elena inhaled, slow, steady. She had practiced silence all her life, and silence had kept her safe. But silence couldn't explain away the look in Caleb's eyes, the look of a boy who had just decided who his protector really was. She raised her head, meeting Grant's gaze. "You're right. It wasn't the first time." Grant blinked. The words landed like stones tossed into a still pond, ripples widening toward memories he had buried too deep. "Go on," he urged, his voice lower now, almost cautious. Elena's eyes grew distant, focused on a past that played behind them like an old reel of film. "There was a daycare at my church in Tulsa. I volunteered there after school. One afternoon, a little girl named Annabeth choked on a grape. No one knew what to do. Her mother screamed, the pastor froze. I remembered the training from a CPR class we'd been required to take. I acted. She lived." Elena's voice faltered, then steadied. "But her father never forgave me for seeing what he couldn't. Sometimes saving a child means stealing a parent's pride. He made sure I understood that. Grant absorbed the confession in silence, his jaw tightening. Pride. The word struck him harder than he expected. Hadn't he just felt that same sting in the kitchen, watching Eleanor succeed where he had frozen? A bitter taste rose in his throat. Familiar from boardrooms where rivals outmaneuvered him, but unbearable here, because this wasn't a rival. This was a maid. He leaned back, fingers drumming the armrest. And yet you still knew what to do today. You didn't hesitate. Eleanor's lips curved into the faintest smile, more weary than proud. When it's a child, hesitation costs. Too much. A silence stretched between them, not empty but crowded, with gratitude, suspicion, something dangerously close to respect. Then Grant shifted, his businessman's instincts clawing back control. "I'll see to it you're compensated. For what you did, this house rewards loyalty." Elena's eyes sharpened, and for the first time her voice carried an edge. "It wasn't loyalty to you, Mr. Whitmore. It was loyalty to Caleb. There's a difference." The remark pierced the polished armor of his authority. Grant opened his mouth, but the sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway interrupted. Victoria Hale, the head housekeeper, burst in without knocking, her normally composed features flushed with unease. "Sir, I apologize, but there's someone at the gate, someone refusing to leave. She insists she has urgent business with you. And, her voice dropped, hesitant, she says it concerns your late wife." The room shifted temperature, Grant's spine stiffened, and Elena's pulse quickened at the mention of Lila Whitmore, the ghost who still breathed through photographs. And whispers. Grant pushed back from his desk, rising to his full height, authority returning like a shield. "Who is she?" Victoria wrung her hands. "She wouldn't give her name, only that you'd understand once you saw her face." Grant's eyes flicked. To Elena. For reasons he couldn't articulate, he found himself gauging her reaction, as if this stranger's arrival might be tied to the maid sitting across from him. Elena didn't flinch, but her grip on the armrest tightened until her knuckles whitened. She whispered almost imperceptibly, "It can't be." Grant turned sharply. "You know something?" But Elena looked down, pressing her lips together. In silence, the study, once a chamber of polished wood and control, now felt like a vault about to crack open. And on the other side of its door waited a revelation that would tear open the Whitmore family's carefully guarded past. When Grant finally strode toward the gate, Eleanor knew the next 5 minutes could undo years of secrets she had promised. Never to speak aloud, the wrought-iron gates of the Whitmore estate groaned open as Grant approached, his stride clipped with impatience. The afternoon sun cast a harsh gleam on the long driveway, and the wind carried the faint scent of pine. From the bordering woods, a black sedan idled just beyond the threshold, its engine humming low like a predator waiting for its chance. A woman stepped out. She wasn't dressed like a solicitor or a guest, no tailored suit, no chic dress, but in a simple denim jacket and a faded floral blouse. Her hair, a deep auburn now streaked with silver, framed a face carved by years of hardship and secrets. She stood there, hands trembling slightly, yet her eyes carried the fire of someone who had rehearsed this confrontation for years. "Grant Whitmore," she said, her voice a mixture of defiance and desperation. "You don't remember me, do you?" Grant's brow furrowed. He studied her, flipping through the mental catalogue of business associates, employees, acquaintances of his late wife. Nothing fit. "No," he said, his tone crisp, defensive. "And I don't appreciate strangers showing up at my home making claims about Lila. If you know something, you'll explain yourself now, or leave." The woman's jaw clenched. "Lila and I were closer than you ever knew, and what I have to say, it changes everything about her, about your son, about the life you think you're protecting." Behind Grant, Victoria Hale hovered nervously, her eyes darting toward the mansion. She had served this household long enough to recognize when danger arrived, cloaked in civility. But it wasn't Victoria's face Grant looked for. It was Eleanor's. She had followed at a distance, compelled by something stronger than duty. Her body was still, but her eyes betrayed recognition, like a child glimpsing a ghost. "Eleanor," Grant demanded, pivoting toward her. "You know her, don't you?" Eleanor's breath caught. She wanted to deny it, to tuck truth back into the shadows where it had slept for years, but the stranger's stare burned through her resolve. Finally, she whispered, "Her name is Clara Jennings." Grant's head snapped back to the woman. "And who exactly is Clara Jennings?" The answer came not from Elena, but from Clara herself. "I was Lila's closest friend, her confidant, and I'm here because before she died, she entrusted me with a truth, one she couldn't share with you." Clara's voice faltered, then hardened. "Elena knows. She was there." Grant felt the ground tilt. His late wife's name was a wound that never healed, and now strangers were cutting it open. His instinct screamed to shut this woman out, to order security to escort her off the property, but another voice, quieter, insistent, whispered that he couldn't afford ignorance. Not when it involved Caleb, not when Elena's silence was screaming louder than Clara's words. Elena finally stepped forward, her voice low but resolute. "Mr. Whitmore, she's not lying. There are things you never knew about Lila. Things she made me promise to keep hidden." Grant's stomach clenched. "Hidden from me? Her husband? From Caleb's father?" His voice cracked on the last word. Elena's eyes softened with regret. "Because she thought the truth would destroy you both." Clara lifted her chin, eyes glistening. "But the longer you keep it buried, the more dangerous it becomes. For you, for Caleb." The weight of the revelation pressed on Grant like the ceiling of his study had caved in. He wanted to demand specifics, to tear the truth out in full. But instinct told him this wasn't a secret to be revealed in front of staff or even in the open air. He motioned toward the house, his voice steady but sharp. "Inside now, all of you." The three of them, Grant, Elena, Clara, moved toward the mansion, Victoria trailing behind like a silent witness to history. As they entered the great hall, Caleb's voice floated from the staircase. "Dad, who's that lady?" His innocence sliced through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. Grant froze, torn between shielding his son and unraveling the truth. Clara's gaze softened when it landed on Caleb, and for a fleeting moment a strange tenderness flickered across her face. She whispered almost to herself, "He looks just like her." Grant stiffened. Like who? Clara's eyes locked onto his, unflinching. Like Lila, and like the man she could never tell you about. The words struck like a thunderclap, rattling the walls of the mansion. Elena shut her eyes, as though she had been bracing for this storm all along. Grant's breath caught in his throat, his hand gripping the banister until his knuckles went white, and in that instant, the carefully constructed world of Grant Whitmore began to crumble, because the truth about Caleb's bloodline was about to surface, and no amount of wealth or power could shield him from it. Grant's grip on the banister tightened until the polished wood threatened to crack under his hand. His pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. "What did you just say?" His voice was low, guttural, the voice of a man balancing on the knife's edge between fury and fear. Clara Jennings didn't flinch. If anything, she seemed to draw strength from the disbelief etched across Grant's face. "You heard me. Caleb is your son by love, Grant, but not by blood." The room seemed to shrink. The crystal chandelier overhead blurred into a constellation of fractured light. Elena stepped forward quickly, her voice trembling but urgent. "Clara, stop! This isn't how Lila wanted it told." Grant turned sharply to Elena, betrayal flashing in his eyes. "You knew?" The weight of his stare pinned her where she stood. Elena's throat tightened. "I promised Lila. She was dying, and she made me swear to protect Caleb, to protect you both." Caleb, halfway down the staircase, froze. At 7 years old, he didn't fully understand the meaning of bloodlines or betrayal, but he knew. Enough to sense that words were weapons here. His wide eyes darted between his father, Elena, and Clara. "Dad!" he whispered, his voice breaking. "What's happening?" Grant raised a hand, desperate to keep his son out of the storm. "Go! Upstairs, Caleb, now!" But Caleb didn't move. He stayed planted on the steps, his small hands gripping the railing. "I don't want to," he said stubbornly. His gaze flicked to Elena, as if she alone could explain the chaos. "Miss Elena, tell me." Elena's chest ached. She wanted to shield him, but the walls of secrecy were collapsing too quickly to rebuild. She lowered her gaze, unable to meet his. Clara's voice sliced through the silence. "The truth is this. Lila loved you, Grant. But before you married, before the Empire, there was another man. His name was Silas Grant. He was fire where you were stone, rebellion where you were discipline. Lila swore it ended before your vows, but months later, she discovered she was with child. Clara's words were knives wrapped in silk. She chose you because you offered stability, protection. But Caleb carries Silas's blood." Grant staggered back a step as though the floor itself had betrayed him. He pressed a hand to his temple, a man used to controlling markets, mergers, men, yet utterly powerless before a ghost from his wife's past. "No," he breathed. "No, she would have told me." Clara's eyes softened, regret flickering in her gaze. "She wanted to. God knows she wanted to. But you idolized her, Grant. You put her on a pedestal so high she couldn't climb down without breaking you. She feared you'd despise her, and worse, despise the child." The silence that followed was unbearable. Even Victoria, the housekeeper who had seen scandals unravel within wealthy families before, felt her breath catch. This wasn't just gossip. This was demolition of lineage, of legacy, of identity. Finally, Grant's gaze snapped back to Elena. "And you? What role did you play in this charade?" Elena's voice broke, but she forced herself to stand tall. "I was the one who held Lila's hand through the illness, the one who heard her confessions when the morphine loosened her lips. She made me promise to guard Caleb with my life, that no matter what truth surfaced, he would never feel unloved. I didn't betray you, Mr. Whitmore. I honored her dying wish." Grant's chest heaved with ragged breaths. Rage and grief tangled inside him, impossible to separate. He turned toward Clara, his eyes blazing. "And why now? Why come here after all these years to spill poison in my house?" Clara's jaw tightened. "Because Silas is back." The words hung in the air like a thunderhead ready to break. Elena gasped softly, her hands flying to her mouth. Grant froze, his heart hammering. "Silas?" The name tasted foreign, bitter. Clara nodded. "He's been gone for years. Texas, California, who knows? But he returned to New York last month, and he's asking questions about Caleb, about the Whitmores." Grant felt the mansion's walls closing in, every portrait of ancestors glaring down at him with silent judgment. His empire, his family name, his future, it all hung on a truth he had never consented to. At the top of the stairs, Caleb whispered the only question that mattered to him. "Am I still your son?" Grant's heart cracked. He looked up, his throat burning, but no words came. And in that silence, Elena stepped forward, her voice steady, fierce. "You are loved, Caleb. No secret changes that." She turned her eyes on Grant, her tone softening. "But it's time you decide whether love or pride defines this family." And as the chandelier above flickered with the first roll of an approaching storm, Grant knew his answer would either bind them together or shatter them forever. The storm broke that night. Rain lashed against the mansion's wide glass windows, turning the reflection of chandeliers into trembling streaks of light. Grant Whitmore sat alone in his study, a half-empty glass of scotch sweating on the desk, his thoughts a carousel of betrayal and grief. Outside his door, footsteps hushed like conspirators. The staff whispered of his rage, of Eleanor's courage, of Clara's shocking revelation, but no one dared to enter. He stared at the photograph of Lila on the mantel, her auburn hair gleaming. Beneath a summer sky, her smile so radiant it seemed impossible she had carried such a secret to her grave. "Why, Lila?" he murmured. His voice cracked. "Why didn't you trust me?" He slammed the glass down, shards of amber liquid spilling. Across the mahogany, the door creaked open, and Elena Marlowe stepped inside. She carried no tray, no duster, only the quiet steadiness that made her presence unavoidable. Grant didn't lift his eyes, but his words cut through the silence. "Do you know what it feels like to build an empire, Elena? To spend years believing your name, your bloodline, your legacy is untouchable, only to learn it was a lie." Elena swallowed hard. "Yes," she said softly. "I know what it feels like to live a lie, to keep a promise that eats away at you because it saves someone else's dignity while burying your own." Grant's eyes snapped up, fury flashing. "Don't compare yourself to me. You kept her secret. You helped deceive me." "She didn't." He flinched. "I kept her secret because she was dying and because she begged me, not for her sake, for Caleb's. She wanted him to grow up loved, not branded as a mistake." The words struck deeper than she intended. Grant rose, pacing the length of the room like a lion caged by revelations. "So what am I supposed to do? Pretend? Look at that boy every morning and tell myself he's mine when I know he isn't?" Elena's voice sharpened, iron beneath velvet. "You don't have to tell yourself he's yours. You only have to remember that he calls you Dad. Blood doesn't raise a child, Grant. Love does, and Caleb loves you more than he'll ever understand." Her defiance silenced him. For a moment the storm outside seemed to pause, as though even the heavens awaited his response. But before he could speak, Victoria Hale appeared in the doorway, pale and shaken. "Sir," she whispered, "Clara Jennings is gone. She left through the servants' gate half an hour ago. But there was a man waiting for her." Grant's gut clenched. "What man?" Victoria's lips trembled. "Tall, dark coat, scar across his jaw. I heard her call him Silas." The name fell like a hammer. Grant gripped the edge of his desk until his knuckles turned white. The ghost from Lila's past was no longer just rumor. He was flesh, blood, and too close to home. Elena's breath hitched. "If Silas is here, he won't stop. He'll want Caleb, not just the truth. He'll want the boy himself." Grant spun toward her, his anger dissolving into something fiercer. "Fear. Over my dead body." Eleanor's eyes, usually so composed, brimmed with tears she refused to shed. "Then you need to choose, Mr. Whitmore. Will you fight for Caleb as his father, or will you let pride strip him from you?" The storm howled louder, rattling the windows, as if echoing the battle within his chest. Grant thought of Caleb's small hands clutching the railing, his innocent voice asking, "Am I still your son?" The question haunted him more than Silas's return, more than Clara's revelations. He turned back to Elena, his voice raw. "You saved his life once. If it comes to it, can I trust you to do it again?" Elena met his gaze, unwavering. "With every breath I have." And just as those words settled, the heavy knock of the front door reverberated through the mansion, 3 sharp pounds that carried menace, authority, and inevitability. Silas Grant had arrived. The knock echoed through the Whitmore mansion like a verdict. 3 deliberate strikes that seemed to shake the walls more than the storm outside. In the foyer, the chandelier swayed gently, as if it too understood the weight of what waited at the door. Grant descended the staircase with the caution of a man walking toward his own execution. Elena followed close behind, her heartbeat a steady drum of dread. Victoria lingered in the shadows, wringing her hands, praying she wouldn't be asked to open that door. But Grant didn't hesitate. He yanked the heavy door wide, and the storm spilled in, rain, wind, and a man who looked carved from the night itself. Silas Grant stood tall, his coat plastered to his frame, his eyes sharp and restless beneath the shadow of the porch light. The scar across his jaw glistened, as if the storm itself had drawn it fresh. "Hello, brother," Silas said, his voice low and rough, like gravel dragged across steel. Grant stiffened. The word brother struck like a curse. "Don't call me that. You lost the right when you abandoned this family." Silas's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Family? You mean the empire you wrapped around yourself like armor? The one you built on lies you didn't even know you were living?" His gaze flicked past Grant, landing on Eleanor, and then upward, where Caleb had crept down 2 steps, curiosity outweighing caution. Silas's expression softened, disturbingly tender. "There he is, my boy." Grant's body moved before thought. He blocked the stairwell with a presence that could have stopped an army. "He is not your boy." Elena's chest tightened as Caleb's small voice broke the silence. "Who is he, Dad?" Grant swallowed hard. "No one you need to know." But Silas chuckled, the sound like thunder rolling over broken glass. "You can't hide the truth forever, Grant. Caleb deserves to know where he comes from. He deserves me." "You deserve nothing," Grant snapped. His voice carried the fury of a man who had built skyscrapers from nothing, who had fought competitors and conquered markets. But behind that fury was fear, raw and uncontainable. Elena stepped forward, her voice steady despite the quake in her heart. "If you cared about Caleb, you wouldn't come here like this. You wouldn't rip open wounds that never had the chance to heal." Silas's eyes narrowed. "And who are you to speak for him? The maid? The servant who hides in the corners but somehow knows every secret in this house?" His smile turned venomous. "Or maybe you're more than that. Maybe Lila trusted you too much." Elena didn't blink. "She trusted me because I earned it, something you never did." The storm howled louder, rattling the French doors behind them. For a moment, the Whitmore mansion felt like the stage of a trial no one had prepared for. Caleb the witness, Grant the defender, Silas the accuser, Elena the unlikely guardian of truth. Grant's voice dropped, cold and final. "You will not set foot past this threshold. Not tonight, not ever. If you try, I'll use every ounce of power I have to bury you." Silas's smile faltered, replaced by something darker, more dangerous. "You can bury me, brother, but you can't bury blood. Caleb will find out, and when he does, he'll come looking for me." The wind slammed the door shut between them, but Silas's words lingered in the hall like smoke. Grant turned, his face pale, his hands trembling though he fought to hide it. Caleb stared at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Dad," Caleb whispered. "Is he telling the truth?" Grant's lips parted, but no sound came. He looked at Eleanor, silent, steady, unflinching. For the first time, Grant realized that the answer, whatever it was, might not come from him. And in that silence, the fragile threads of loyalty, truth, and love stretched to the breaking point, because soon one of them would snap. The mansion held its breath after Silas's departure. Every wall, every echo of dripping rain seemed to conspire against Grant, pressing him into silence. Caleb's question lingered in the air. Is he telling the truth? And the weight of it bore down like a gavel waiting to strike. Grant wanted to deny it, to sweep the revelation away with the force of his authority. But authority meant nothing in the face of a child's trust. His lips parted, yet only fragments escaped. He's nothing, Caleb. He's not. Elena cut him off gently, her voice soft but firm. Caleb, listen to me. She crouched so that her eyes met his, steady pools in the storm of confusion. What Silas said, it's complicated, but what you need to know right now is this. Your father, the man who tucks you in at night, who cheers when you score a goal, who worries when you're sick, that is Grant. That is your dad. Nothing changes that. Caleb's lower lip trembled. His gaze flicked between Grant's rigid stance and Eleanor's calm certainty. But he looked at me like he knew me. Grant's chest ached. He knelt beside his son, placing both hands on his shoulders, finally letting the walls drop. Caleb, I don't care what Silas says. You are my son. Not by accident, not by charity, by choice. Do you understand me? By choice, every single day. Tears welled in Caleb's eyes, and he collapsed into Grant's embrace, burying his face against his chest. The storm outside roared, but for a fleeting moment, father and son stood unshaken. Elena turned away, her throat tight. She had promised Lila she would guard Caleb's heart, and now, watching Grant choose love over pride, she felt that promise finally begin to take root. But her relief was short-lived. Clara Jennings emerged from the shadows at the edge of the hall, her face pale with urgency. Silas won't stop, she whispered. You don't know him like I do. He's not just here to claim Caleb. He's here to destroy you, Grant. To take everything you've built, your name, your fortune, your future. Grant rose slowly, his jaw set like granite. Let him try. I've fought off vultures my whole life. Clara shook her head fiercely. This isn't business. This is personal, and he has nothing left to lose. That makes him dangerous. Elena stepped closer, her voice barely audible but cutting through the tension. And you can't fight him alone. Grant turned to her, surprise flickering in his eyes. He had always seen Elena as a servant, reliable but replaceable. Yet in this moment, she stood like an equal, unwavering in the storm. Before he could reply, the power in the mansion flickered and died, plunging the great hall into darkness. Only the storm's lightning lit the room in violent flashes, illuminating Caleb's frightened face, Clara's clenched fists, and Grant's grim resolve. And then, in the silence between thunderclaps, a voice drifted through the broken window. Near the foyer, low, mocking, unmistakable. You can lock your doors, brother. You can hide behind your fortune, but the truth will break through. Caleb will know me. Silas's words slid through the house like a blade. Caleb shivered, clutching Grant's sleeve. Elena stepped forward instinctively, her body a shield. And in that moment it became clear, this battle wasn't just for legacy or pride. It was for the very soul of a child, and none of them could walk away unscarred. Lightning fractured the sky, illuminating the Whitmore estate in jagged bursts of silver. Rain hammered against the tall windows, and in the flicker of each strike, shadows leapt across the walls like phantoms. The mansion had survived storms before, but never one like this, because this storm wasn't just outside. It lived in the hearts of everyone under that roof. Grant pulled Caleb closer, every instinct screaming to protect. "We're leaving this hall," he commanded, his voice sharp, decisive. "Upstairs. Now." But Eleanor placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "If you run, he'll chase. He wants fear. Don't give it to him." Grant turned on her, eyes blazing. "You think I'll risk Caleb's safety to prove a point?" Her voice cut through his anger, low and unyielding. "This isn't about proving a point. It's about ending this before Silas drags it further into the dark. If you run tonight, he won't stop. He'll come back tomorrow and the day after, and Caleb will grow up in fear." Clara, still pale but resolute, stepped closer. She's right. Silas isn't just after Caleb. He's after you, Grant. You have to face him on your terms, not his. Grant's jaw clenched. For once in his life, all his power, his wealth, his strategies felt useless. Yet he saw in Elena's eyes something he hadn't seen in years, clarity born of survival. She wasn't just a maid. She was a woman who had carried secrets heavier than gold, who had stood in the fire of truth and still remained. Before he could answer, another crash of thunder rattled the house, and this time it wasn't just thunder. A shattering sound erupted from the west wing. Glass, the unmistakable echo of an intruder forcing entry. Caleb whimpered, clinging tighter to his father. "Dad, he's inside." Grant's eyes darkened. "Not for long." He handed Caleb toward Elena, his voice urgent. "Take him, keep him safe, no matter what." Elena hesitated, her heart pounding, then nodded. "I promise." She pulled Caleb into her arms, his small body trembling against her chest. Grant moved toward the study, the direction of the noise, every step a war drum. But before he reached the door, Clara caught his sleeve. "Be careful," she whispered. "Silas isn't here for a conversation. He's here for blood." The hallway fell into silence, broken only by the storm. Elena whispered into Caleb's ear, "It's going to be all right." But her own heart betrayed her, hammering with the dread of a truth she couldn't say aloud. This night would not end without scars. Inside the study, the air was colder, charged with menace. Silas stood near the broken French doors, rainwater dripping from his coat, his silhouette carved by the lightning behind him. In his hand gleamed something metallic, a revolver, its barrel slick with rain. "Finally," Silas drawled, his voice echoing like a hymn turned curse. "The great Grant Whitmore, cornered in his own palace. Do you feel it, brother? The collapse of everything you built?" Grant's voice was steady, though his pulse thundered in his veins. "You came here for Caleb, but he's mine. You'll never take him." Silas lifted the revolver, his smile cruel. "Then let's see how much you're willing to lose to keep him." And in the hallway, Eleanor tightened her arms around Caleb as the first gunshot cracked through the mansion like the breaking of fate. The Whitmore's world had just gone from storm to war, and no one knew who would survive the night. The gunshot tore through the mansion's silence, ricocheting off marble and mahogany, a single note of chaos in a symphony of storm. Elena flinched, her arms tightening instinctively around Caleb. The boy buried his face in her shoulder, trembling as if the sound had split his small world in two. "Stay with me," she whispered, forcing her voice to be steady, even as her pulse screamed. She glanced at Clara, who hovered in the hall like a ghost, torn between loyalty and fear. "Keep close. If anything happens, you run with him. Do you hear me?" Inside the study, Grant staggered backward, the bullet having grazed the edge of the desk, splintering wood into shards. Silas stood framed by lightning, the revolver steady, his grin unnervingly calm. "You've lost your edge, Grant," Silas sneered. "You've spent too long hiding behind wealth and walls. But blood, our blood, always demands reckoning." Grant's chest heaved. He had fought hostile takeovers, ruthless competitors, men who would sell their souls for profit. But this was different. This was family. This was a man who claimed a right not through contracts or stock, but through the veins of his son. "You're not his father," Grant growled, his voice low, primal. "You walked away from everything you touched. You left Lila. You left me. You left whatever family could have been. Caleb doesn't need a ghost for a father. He needs someone who stays." Silas's jaw tightened, the mockery flickering into rage. "You think staying makes you worthy? You think money and a mansion erase the truth? He deserves to know me. He will know me. Lightning split the sky again, and in that flash Grant lunged. The two men collided, the revolver clattering across the floor. Wood splintered as they slammed into the bookshelves, leather-bound volumes crashing around them. Fists flew, raw and unrestrained, not the polished strikes of boardroom rivals, but the feral violence of brothers torn apart by love and betrayal. Elena heard the struggle and thrust Caleb into Clara's arms. "Take him upstairs. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." Clara's eyes widened. "Elena, go!" Elena barked, her voice edged with steel. Clara obeyed, rushing Caleb up the staircase as the boy cried out, "Dad! Dad!" Elena ran toward the study. She wasn't thinking about her place in the household or about the invisible lines between servant and master. She thought only of the promise she had made to Lila, the vow to protect Caleb, to hold the family together even when blood tried to tear it apart. She burst into the room just as Silas overpowered Grant, pinning him against the desk, his hand reaching for the fallen revolver. Grant's face twisted in pain, his strength waning under the weight of his brother's fury. Elena didn't hesitate. She grabbed the heavy brass candlestick from the mantel and swung it with all the force her trembling arms could muster. It connected with Silas's shoulder, sending him sprawling across the floor. The revolver skidded beneath the armchair. Breathless, she planted herself between the two men, chest heaving, eyes blazing. "Enough!" she shouted, her voice cutting through storm and rage alike. "This isn't about you, Silas. It isn't even about you, Grant. It's about Caleb, and if either of you cared half as much as you claim, you'd stop tearing him apart to prove who owns him." The room froze. Even the storm seemed to pause, waiting. Silas rose slowly, fury in his eyes but hesitation in his step. He hadn't expected the maid, the silent shadow of this house, to wield such fire. Grant, bleeding from a cut above his brow, stared at Elena as if seeing her for the first time, not as staff, not as obligation, but as something far greater. And in that charged silence, one truth became clear. The future of the Whitmore family would not be decided by the brothers at war, but by the woman who had saved the boy once with her hands and now with her courage. But as Silas's hand twitched toward the revolver again, Elena knew her greatest test was still moments away, and one wrong move could shatter everything forever. The air in the study was thick with storm and gunpowder, the metallic tang of fear settling in every breath. Silas's fingers stretched toward the revolver lying beneath the armchair, his eyes glinting with the kind of madness born not of love, but of obsession. Grant Whitmore staggered to his feet, blood trickling down his brow, while Elena planted herself like a wall between the two brothers, her chest rising and falling with unyielding defiance. "Don't do this, Silas," Elena warned, her voice trembling yet unbreakable. "You claim Caleb as yours, but all he's seen tonight is violence. Do you want his first memory of you to be terror?" Silas froze, his hand hovering inches from the revolver. For a moment, something human flickered in his expression, a hesitation, a crack in the fury. But rage is a jealous companion, and it clawed back control. He bared his teeth. "He deserves the truth, even if he has to watch me tear down the lie you built." "Truth?" Elena's voice rang out over the storm. "Truth isn't bloodlines scribbled in shadows. Truth is love shown in the daylight. Truth is a father who stayed, who carried Caleb when fever burned him, who never missed a birthday, no matter the meetings or the mergers. That is the truth Caleb knows, and that is the truth he'll remember long after tonight." Grant's breath caught. For years, he had hidden behind wealth, business, and pride, convinced that legacy meant marble estates and family names carved in history. But hearing Elena now, this maid who had stood quietly at the edges of his life, who had saved his son, not once but twice, he felt the fragile scaffolding of pride collapse. What mattered wasn't the empire. It was the boy asleep upstairs, clinging to the hope that love would win over blood. Silas's hand touched the revolver. His knuckles whitened, and then Caleb's voice pierced the silence from the staircase. "Stop!" Everyone froze. Caleb stood barefoot in the hall, tears streaking down his cheeks, his small frame trembling but his eyes steady. "I don't care whose blood I have. I don't want fights. I just want my dad. And my dad is Grant. Whitmore." The words fell like lightning, brighter and sharper than the storm outside. Silas blinked, the revolver slipping from his grasp. His chest rose and fell as if the child's innocence had disarmed him more thoroughly than any weapon. For the first time, his shoulders sagged, defeat etched into his frame. He turned his face away, shame swallowing the fury. Grant crossed the room in 2 strides, scooping Caleb into his arms. His voice broke as he whispered, "You are my son, always." Then, turning to Silas, his tone hardened. "Leave. Whatever claim you think you have, it ends tonight. If you truly care about Caleb, even a fraction, then let him live in peace." Silas's eyes glistened, though whether with rain or regret, no one could tell. Without another word, he pulled his coat tight, pushed past the shattered door, and vanished into the storm. The mansion exhaled. The silence that followed was not empty, but alive with the echoes of choice. Grant set Caleb down gently and turned to Elena. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, the woman he had underestimated, the woman who had held his family together. "When blood sought to tear it apart, you saved him again," he murmured, his voice thick with gratitude, not just his life, but his soul. Elena lowered her gaze, humility softening her strength. "I only kept my promise, to Lila and to him." Grant stepped closer. "No, Elena, you kept a promise bigger than any of us, and I will never forget it." Above them, the storm began. Trees, the thunder rolling into the distance. For the first time in years, Grant felt the weight of legacy lift from his shoulders, replaced by something simpler, purer, love that had been chosen, not inherited. Caleb, still clutching his father's, and looked up at Elena. "Will you stay with us?" he asked, his voice timid, hopeful. Elena smiled softly, her eyes shining. "As long as you need me." And in that moment, the Whitmore family wasn't defined by secrets or betrayals, but by the courage to face them and the redemption that followed. I'm John Parker, and remember, every story hides a truth. His warm, steady voice returned, as if stitching the night together. Tonight we've seen that family is not measured by blood or pride, but by the love that endures through storms. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give your like, it means so much, and leave in the comments which city or country you're listening from. Together, we can share stories that remind us love in the end always wins. The mansion stood against the retreating storm, its broken glass glinting in the moonlight like scars that proved survival. Inside, father, son, and maid sat together, not as master and servant, not as heir and guardian, but as a family reborn through trial. And for the first time in years, the Whitmore estate was not just a house of wealth, it was a home of love.